Are you ready to unlock your full potential and maximize your productivity? Look no further than Productivity Smarts, the ultimate audio podcast hosted by renowned productivity expert Gerald J. Leonard. In every episode, Gerald shares captivating stories, invaluable tips, and cutting-edge strategies that will transform the way you approach productivity. Whether you're looking to reduce stress, overcome overwhelm, or simply get more done in less time, Productivity Smarts has got you covered. But that's not all. You'll also gain inspiration from real-life success stories of individuals who have achieved greatness through productivity. Plus, you'll learn the latest tools, techniques, and habits that will help you achieve a new level of happiness and fulfillment in your personal and professional life. So why wait? Join us every week as we delve into the exciting world of productivity and help you unleash your full potential. Get ready to take your productivity to the next level with Productivity Smarts. As a productivity expert and host of the Productivity Smarts podcast, Gerald J. Leonard has been a proud supporter of Kiva since 2011. Kiva is a non-profit organization that helps entrepreneurs in third world countries access the capital they need to start or grow their businesses. By making a small loan through Kiva, you can help these entrepreneurs achieve their dreams, support their families, and contribute to their local economies. And with a repayment rate of over 96%, your loan can be re-lent to another entrepreneur once it's repaid, creating a ripple effect of positive change. So if you're looking for a meaningful way to make a difference in the world, consider making a loan through Kiva. With loans as small as $25, anyone can be a microlender and help change lives. Visit kiva.org to learn more and start lending today.
Well, today I'm speaking to Cherian Koshy. He's the author of Neuro Giving, the science of donor decision-making. Cherian blends neuroscience, psychology, and real-world leadership to reveal how understanding human motivation helps us make better decisions, work more effectively, and give meaningful impact at work and in life. Cherian, how are you?
I'm doing real well, Gerald. How are you? Great to be on.
Great. Excellent. Great to have you on the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thanks.
Well, listen, I always ask my guests this question because, as you know, I'm a classical and jazz bass player, and I'm always curious about music. So what's your favorite style of music?
My favorite, well, I'm an 80s kid, so 80s music is my jam.
Okay.
But I like all kinds of music. It doesn't really matter to me. Whenever there's music on, I'm just glad there's music on.
Okay, excellent. Now, if you want to be really inspired or motivated, what's your soundtrack?
Classical music is the music that I have on when I'm working.
Okay.
Yep.
Why is that?
Oddly enough, this comes back to the science. The science talks about how classical music works to help you get into a flow state. And so I don't know if that actually does something. I guess the science says it does, but I think it helps me get into a rhythm of doing the work that I need to do. So I put on a certain set of classical music, the Spotify playlist.
So the science behind that is that classical music that you're talking about probably focuses around the theta wave frequency.
Yep.
And because of the binomial beats and also the idea of oscillation, that when we hear music that's vibrating at a certain level, and we're engaged with it, our brains nearly fall into that pattern. And so your brain falls into that theta wave pattern that the music is going, which is much more of a creative, focus, digging deep, opening the subconscious, learning. So it really gets into that. In my second book, I wrote about the definition of music, which comes from the Greek word, the muse.
Oh, fantastic.
And so you think about the muse, right? They're singing and they put you in this trance. And that's what music does, right?
Yeah.
It puts us in a trance that gets us to think and focus. So which is really cool. Now, you've written a really interesting book, Neuro Giving. I've heard of neuromarketing and I've heard of neuro this and neuro that.
Yep.
I hadn't seen one on Neuro Giving until I saw your title of your book and the science of donor decision-making. I bought it and it made me really curious to understand, okay, what is this all about? How does this work? What's the research behind it? And I found it to be a really excellent book, especially if you're interested in learning more about how to influence and persuade or work with people based on how their brains work and not against it. So how did you get started in writing about this, and what's made you successful throughout your career in regards to this?
First of all, thanks for buying it. I'm a little surprised by how well it's done. Yesterday, as this is being recorded, we hit number 11 on the USA Today bestseller list, which is it's surprising for a book that's specific for nonprofit organizations. I don't think a book for nonprofit organizations has ever hit the USA Today bestseller list. It's been on there now 2 weeks in a row. So that's very interesting for a niche book like this. And I think it's because there are books, as you mentioned, on things like neuromarketing. There's certainly books like neuroscience generally that are out there. Dan Ariely's books, for example, that are quoted in the book are out there. And it's primarily around how the brain works in other contexts, but there wasn't a book specifically around how generosity functions. And I've spent the last almost 30 years in a generosity context, working with donors in nonprofit organizations. And I was trying to figure out why certain things worked and why certain things didn't work.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got exposed to neuroscience and behavioral science that everything started to click. And I had been doing the research and then trying to help other people figure this out. And I put all of that research and understanding into this book and made it available. And what I'm sure you found is that it's very research driven. It's not my feeling around what we're pointing people to the research around it.
Yeah, no, I really like that part, and how you cite the examples, you cite the research, but you do it in a way that makes it really clear. You know, I love the statements where you talk about donors give because they trust, right? Donors give because of emotions, and that without emotions, it's really difficult to make any decision. And it's kind of like Daniel Kahneman's concept of system 1 and system 2. You know, we make the decision emotionally, and then within seconds, we start rationalizing it. And then we go, man, I made a really rational decision. No, you didn't.
Yep. I don't know who said this, but someone said that we're not rational beings, we're rationalizing beings.
Yes.
And so the concepts in this book are probably rather new to nonprofit organizations, but as you know, they're not very new concepts. I mean, Kahneman's been talking about it for a long time. Tversky's been talking about it. I mean, this is 1979 books, right? So they're not new concepts, but when applied in these particular areas, what I found is that we had been doing it maybe the wrong way, or maybe not knowing why the right things were working. And so applicable to kind of how your podcast is working, what I wanted to give people were the ways in which the notes worked so that they could play jazz. And the key was we were maybe like duplicating the songs and being able to play certain songs just by rote memory. And they sounded okay, but they didn't actually know how to put the chords together so that they could play their own music. And that's really the key of this book, but it also applies to leaders leading their team. It applies to anyone. Obviously, you know, if you're a business or something like that, it's a good gift to a nonprofit organization that you support. But there's other pieces in neuroscience and behavioral science that would be very applicable to your own work.
Exactly. This just kind of struck me as we're talking, the idea of neuro giving. Even as an employee where you're working for a salary, you stepped up and said, I want to work for this company. Yes, I'm going to interview. Yes, I'm going to have to get a paycheck. Yes, I'm going to have to punch the clock, blah, blah, blah. But you're making a decision to give your time.
That's right.
So it's somewhat aligning with this neuro giving concept. And the reason you're making a decision to give your time is either one or two things. The work is meaningful and the people around you, you trust and like them. And especially if you find yourself 10 years, 20 years, 30 years into the same company or the same industry and working with the same people, you're using a lot of the same concepts of neuro giving.
That's 100% right.
You're basically saying, hey, I like the people I'm around. I trust them. I believe in what we're doing. I'm willing to work the 40 hours. And then if you really love your job and really love what you're doing, you may work 50 or 60 hours, but you're only getting paid for 40. So you're giving to your industry, to your business because of the underlying things that you've done in your research. And I think the other thing that steps into your research that, I would say Daniel Kahneman and some of the other folks did not have is all of the scientific advancements in MRIs and fMRIs and ways to scan the brain and so on and so forth that now you had available to you in your research. So let me ask you this. In the book, Neuro Giving, you explore how our brains make decisions. How can understanding decision science immediately improve a person's productivity?
So decision science is a big, broad term about how we understand not only our own biases, but other people's biases. And the way that I try to communicate that in workshops and keynotes is to describe the brain as a cell phone that's always working under 1% battery life. And so the brain is 3% of our body mass, but consumes 25% of our calorie content every single day. And the key piece of that is it's always looking for shortcuts to make decisions. So when you know that about your own decision making, we're trying to take as many shortcuts as our brain is trying to take as many shortcuts around productivity as possible.
Right.
So for your own productivity, you probably know that you make better, deeper decisions at certain times of the day than you do at other times of the day. You're better at deep work at certain times of the day and more thoughtful decisions, work at different times of the day. It's key to understanding yourself and where that time and energy should be spent first and foremost. So for me, and for most people, where your energy is highest, where your calorie consumption is the highest, is the beginning of the day, and you're able to do most of your work in that kind of general span of time, generally at the beginning of the day. By the end of the day, when your calorie consumption has been consumed and your waning is by the end of the day. So you want to focus on less of the high decision threshold components later. You don't want to make those decisions later in the day. That's one really simple example, a way to kind of think about productivity. But the other piece is just to be aware of how your brain tends to make these decision science calls heuristics. We all make heuristic decisions all the time. And, a lot of books that are on the perennial bestseller list, like Atomic Habits, for example, that will come out a ton at the beginning of the year, are all about making these very small decisions, which are great and useful around not only the beginning of the year, but like at certain points in your life around milestones. These productivity decisions are all big boosts to folks, but the key to remember is that we're reframing how we're making our productivity decisions. So my friend Owen Fitzpatrick is a great behavioral scientist as well, psychologist, is coming out with a new book soon. He talks about it in terms of reframing the things that we don't want to do as key concepts. And so from a productivity perspective, the example that he gives is around smoking. And he said that someone talked about, like, I'm a smoker, talked to the person about how much time do you spend smoking? And, when you do the math, it's like 80 minutes a day, even if you're a pretty significant smoker. And he said, so you're actually a person who spends this many hours awake with 80 minutes smoking. And when framed in that way, you're not actually a smoker. You are someone who spends most of their day doing something else, and you only spend 80 minutes smoking. And that starting frame it shifts your perspective in a really significant way. So my big recommendation from a productivity perspective is actually to rethink, just like Owen suggests, rethink how you are shaping your entire concept of the day and put into perspective what are the most important pieces that you need to accomplish. So for example, if you have a big project that you need to get done, order, is this the most important thing that I need to get done? And put that squarely, this is the piece that I need to accomplish, as opposed to saying, this is one of the pieces that I need to get done, just for you.
Yeah, it's really important that the reframing, I love that concept, of reframing because, again, when someone says, I am a smoker, you're basically saying that's the essence of your being, that I am statement. And, and when you do the math and you look at the logic of it, it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're making it true in your own mind, right? And that's one of the concepts of limitation thinking. When you limit yourself, is that you embrace a thought process and then you claim it, and then you make it a part of, in your own mind, an I am statement. And then everything that happens to you is seen through that lens.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you reframe it by saying, hey, I'm alive this many hours a day, but I'm only spending this much time doing this. Well, I can't be that thing because I'm only doing it for a fraction of the time that I'm alive. So what else am I doing that's making an impact? And that adjustment, as you're saying, that reframing changes the lens in which you see the world and see your life. And you can begin to get different results because that really has a big impact. Now, you also talk about motivation and meaning in your book. How can professionals avoid burnout? And obviously, burnout is a big issue right now, especially between the political stress, the military stress, the global economy stress, holidays, and so on and so forth. Burnout can be a major issue. But how can people avoid burnout by aligning work with what actually drives where their brain works?
Yeah. So one of the big pieces that I talk about in the book around donations and fundraising and nonprofits is that the risk that organizations take in causing burnout for donors is about placing urgency at the forefront all the time.
Yeah.
And the reality is that the reason why that fails is because our brains go into essentially a compassion fatigue mindset. And when, as you point out, everybody's under stress all the time. So if our brains are that cell phone that's operating under 1% mode, when you add in constant stress, which we're all under for all kinds of reasons, it basically says, I have to focus on the one thing that I have to do at this moment and exclude everything else. And so what burnout does is for employees, for leaders, is it shuts down all kinds of other components, like, for example, taking care of yourself and rest and whatnot. So the key is to understand that your brain, your body is under stress right now, and to prioritize in those times that you recognize there are places where, and this is what I do, where stress is going to require your brain to try and accomplish what it most needs to do in those periods of time, whether it's a productivity component, whether it's a work component or whatever, and it will try to exclude the things that it doesn't think it needs to do, but actually needs to do. So for example, today, I don't see a place in my day for getting up and taking breaks or eating lunch. For example, I've got a bunch of podcast media interviews and whatnot. So it doesn't seem like there's a place to take lunch. So I actually put a place in my calendar for lunch and put breaks into my calendar for lunch so that my brain sees it on the calendar and says, this is time scheduled for that process.
Right.
You might find that to be like overly structured, potentially unnecessary, but it is the shortcut that my brain needs. It's the decision that my brain needs to say, that is the time that's necessary. Maybe it's not necessary for you on a daily basis. Maybe it's needed on a weekly basis for you to put something in the calendar or whatnot. But burnout requires your brain to be able to see the place where it has, and I talk about this in the book, where urgency sees hope or a relief valve. And when the brain has that, it creates the opportunity to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, one of the, as you were talking, this thought came to mind, and as I'm listening to you, and it is the idea that, one of the hacks that I use on my daily planning is I always try to think like, tomorrow I'm going on vacation. And I want to go on vacation rested and ready to go, but I also have some serious things I got to get done. And so by thinking that way, I go, okay, one, I got to build in those breaks. I got to build in lunch. I got to build in time to pack, or I got to build in time for personal things I got to do. But I got these work things I got to get done. And I'm looking at my calendar and I may have 12 things on my list. And I go, okay, I can't get all 12 done. I might be able to get 2 or 3 done with a couple of meetings I have. Out of everything on that list, what are the 2 to 3 things I have to get done that's going to move the needle so that I could go away for a week?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going away rested and rejuvenated. I'm excited, but I'm moving the needle really quickly, right? Thinking that way on a daily basis kind of positions you or frames you in a way where, one, you put that structure in place. You're balancing out your personal needs because obviously if you're going to go on vacation, you got personal things you got to do. But you also have these business things or work things that you have to get done, and they have to be things that are going to move the needle.
Mm-hmm.
And by taking the concept that you just shared and then taking that little hack that I use on myself, it allows me to get a lot of stuff done in a day, but at the same time, build in those times of rest, lunch, because that's where I think people really get themselves in trouble is they have this list of 12 things and they go, I got to get them all done.
Exactly.
And they're not all important.
That's right.
And then they don't build in at the same time self-care. Having lunch is self-care. Taking a 15-minute break is self-care.
Yeah.
Taking a 30-minute nap is self-care. And actually, I've learned that you can do that in a really busy environment. In fact, with Thomas Edison and other famous inventors normally took naps because it allowed them to recharge their brain, allowed them to let the non-conscious work on things that they're working through, and so on and so forth. Now, for creatives, people who are creatives, and a lot of us are now becoming creatives because we're using social media for our jobs and so on and so forth. Sometimes activity comes in waves where we get a burst of energy, almost like a husky having zoomies. Right? We're just like, okay, now we got to go instead of run around and get a lot of stuff done. What does neuroscience say about timing, energy, and creative output?
So there's quite a bit that neuroscience talks about in terms of creativity and output. The key is that when you're creating something, there's 2 components. One is where you're stuck and you're not feeling like you can be as creative as you want to be. And the other place is where you are being very creative and you want to stay in that creative state. So I want to touch on both. One is where that creative moment is not capturing you, for example. And the piece I wanted to discuss there is that sometimes we feel like we can force that moment, like we can create the creative moment. And the reality is that we have to give our brains space to create the connection between things that we haven't necessarily thought about or put into place. And our brains actually need, combining the 2 things that we've just talked about, we actually need rest and we need downtime in order to create. We need good sleep. We need to actually not have essentially conscious thought about creativity in order to be creative. So it's that liminal space where creativity can thrive and function. Your brain is actually working when you're not thinking about being creative. My biggest recommendation for folks who are waiting to be creative is to actually go do something else, to get up and go for a walk, listen to some music, watch a TV show, go do something that doesn't relate to the thing that you're doing. And that will actually spark the creativity and you'll find that it actually jumpstarts the creative process. That's truly how the brain works because it offloads that part of the brain to actually function. The second part is where you're in the creative space. The biggest thing that takes you out of the creative space is when a distraction occurs. And the distraction can be any kind of thing. It can be a notification on your phone, which is ever present or constant. It can be something else in your environment. It can, any number, it can be inside of your body. It can be anything. So the more that you can eliminate that from your environment, that's the key to keeping yourself in the moment and focused upon what you're doing.
Exactly. As you were talking, I remember Jack Canfield and another gentleman named Dr. Paul Shealy talks about that when we are in that creative state in which we want to be in that creative state and we find that we're not, we could basically talk to ourselves. We talk to ourselves anyway, right? We talk to ourselves all the time, right? And if you're not talking, you don't think you talk to yourself, just listen for a second and you realize that you really are talking to yourself. But if in that talking to yourself, if you just got to give yourself the instructions of, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem. Could you help me solve this problem? You're basically talking to the subconscious and the non-conscious. And now go do something else that's not related to that problem. Don't sit and stare at the computer or stare at the spreadsheet or stare at the problem, whatever that may be. Go literally do something else. Take the dog for a walk. If you don't have a dog, just go for a walk. Go do something in the garden, go for a run, get on the bike, do anything other than what you are trying to focus on, the problem. And what you will find 9 times out of 10 is that while you're doing that, the solution, the idea, the inspiration will pop up.
That's right.
Because you've given your non-conscious mind the instructions, and it is the part of us that runs all of the involuntary aspects of our body, right? Our heartbeats, our stomach digesting and all the, blood flowing and energy flowing throughout the body. It regulates everything. So it has the ability to take an idea that we're giving it and work on it while we're not thinking about it. Because even when you sleep, your brain is processing information. And so if you prime yourself before you go to sleep, you will come up with better ideas in the morning because your non-conscious will work on it. So it's really, really important. I also love the other thing you talked about, which is the environment. And that kind of leads me into the next idea, which is how can leaders design work environments that support focus and smarter decision-making? Because I really believe that our environment can really be a signal for us to make better decisions and support our brain health.
You bet. So one of the reasons why I wrote this book was because as a leader of teams, what I found was there are certain things that we could do to create environments that engendered trust and led teams to do their best work. Or we could shut down people from doing their best work and create environments where they felt like they were just punching a clock. And unfortunately, that chapter had to get pulled from the book. And so I offered it as a pre-order bonus. And I'm a Exactly What to Say certified guide. It's the Exactly What to Say book by Phil M. Jones. And so I get to do that work with teams all the time. And the key piece that we work on in that framework is to discuss how teams create, leaders specifically, create trust in their teams by creating an environment where they create curiosity amongst team members, being able to ask questions rather than creating an environment where they're telling their teams exactly what to do and saying, this is the process of creating widgets, and you do this piece and only this piece, and then move on. Instead, that trust environment allows people to collaborate, to ask questions, to engage one another, and then to be able to do things that they believe will ultimately achieve the goal, the outcome. And that emotional satisfaction, that safety environment does, as you talked about earlier, when people do workplace studies, the trust, emotional satisfaction, all of those components are what people are looking for in a job these days. Those are the key components of why people stay, of why they, what avoids burnout. So when leaders are looking for what to accomplish in the workforce, these principles are critical. But then what I would also add is that there's truly a framework in understanding decision-making when you're trying to solve a problem collaboratively as a team. The huge issue today is that the problems that we face, and it doesn't matter if you are a small business or a gigantic enterprise business, the problems that we face are not problems that one person knows the answer to.
Right, exactly.
20 years ago, it was the smartest person in the room knew the answer. Here's how to fix the factory line. You change the nut and the bolt here, and the problem is solved.
Right.
Today, that's not the issue. The issue has to be solved by people coming together, collaboratively figuring out the solution. So when that's the problem, it's about how do we get the people in the room to work together in the best way possible to get the right ideas working together so that we can implement a solution and try that out and see if that will work, particularly around relationships in that room and relationships outside of that room. This has everything to do with decision science. Inside of the room, what's occurring, outside of the room, what's occurring. So there are specific frameworks around how that plays out that we don't have time to go into today, but that's the key, and why I would recommend that every leader start thinking about, how does decision science play into my internal processes and my external processes? What questions should I be asking? What questions, should I be thinking about prior to getting into those discussions so that I can be best prepared?
What I loved about your book is that donors give, whether they're influential, and this relates to the trust and connection conversation we're having, whether they're influential or not, that when a person gives once, they may have been sparked by inspiration to give. But when they give on a consistent basis to a specific organization, there's a link between that giving and their identity.
Absolutely.
And then there's a link between their identity and the trust and the connection they have with the human beings in that organization, not just the idea of the organization, but the other human beings. And, it's critical. I think what we're talking about here is so critical in business. And I think this is why I definitely recommend your book for leaders, even the profit organizations, to look at the neuroscience of giving, because your employees are giving themselves to the work. Yeah, they're getting a paycheck, but they're giving their heart. And what you want them to do is you want them to give their hearts, their heads, and their hands to the organization, because then you're going to be able to collaboratively do things. I remember some work I was doing where I was brought in and we had like 15 days to prove a concept with a new team. And this was years ago. And I started doing Agile before Agile was really popular. And what I mean by that is we started meeting every day and sometimes 2 or 3 times a day to solve these problems. And although we had our computers, we got in a room and we had a whiteboard and we had Post-it notes. And we said, okay, here's what we have to achieve in 15 days. Here's where we are. We got to fill in this gap, right, between these 2 points, point A and point B. And I don't have all the answers. Neither one of you have all the answers. It was 4 of us in the room. But collectively together, we can use our brains to kind of come up with the answer. We came up with a solution that allows us to solve that problem in 14 days.
That's
brand new team. And the only reason it worked was that when we were done, I made sure everybody understood this is our plan. We all contributed to making this work, and we all are going to be able to stand up before the senior executive who we're doing this for and say this was based on the team, not one individual. And because of that, it created trust, it created connection. It was like playing jazz, right?
Yeah.
Because we had here's the beginning of the song, here's the end of the song. What happens in the middle, we don't know, but we're going to have to support each other, and you're going to have to solo, and you're going to have to solo, and we all got to support you to make it work. But because we were there listening intently and silently looking at how we can work together, it created that trust and connection. What are some tools we could use today? I know we can't go into the details of it, but what is 1 or 2 tools that we could use today to help build that trust?
So one of the, just kind of riffing off what you just said, one of the questions that often shows up in workplace satisfaction surveys is, do you have friends at work? And particularly in remote environments, the challenge that leaders face is, how do we get buy-in? How do we get loyalty? And I don't mean that in a bad way. How do we get people to engage and feel like the work is their own? And they take, a lot of leaders talk about owning the work and having ownership, so that the company goals are their goals and they feel like they are, taking ownership of the KPIs and making it their own. And so one of the pieces that I use all the time is a planner. I have a planner that I use. It's the EWTS planner that is free to use and it's easy. I find the planner works really well for myself. And it's something I've implemented with our team in an agile framework that is helpful to map out, here's the work that we're going to do, just like you did with the agile framework. Those processes of saying, here's what we're trying to accomplish in this time frame. But the other piece around burnout that we talked about before is that when you're done with the day, you essentially offload everything that you haven't done today onto next day's to-do list so that your brain takes that break and it says, all right, here's everything that I need to do so that your brain can actually rest and have that neurological dump of, I don't need to think about this anymore because I know that it goes here. Exactly. And there's, other benefits to the planner as well. I feel like a planner, whether it's a written planner or a digital planner, really does help. And I also have a digital one as well that helps me with scheduling. In the age of AI, I feel like that complicates things, but it also creates opportunity for us as well that enables teams to create synergies and create technology solutions that provide you with productivity tools. And there are parts of it. I mean, I built and sold an AI company, so I don't hate AI in any way, shape, or form, but I do love a written planner for some pieces. I have Post-it notes all over the place. But I do use an AI tool, reschedules things on my calendar. I really do find valuable. So that's one tool that I think is really helpful. But for me, nothing changes or nothing's going to replace like actually handwriting some things that really just does help offload ideas and concepts that's just tactical for me.
Oh, yeah, because when you're writing, it's a kinetic concept,
it is.
Right?
It
engages your head, it engages your brain. That you remember things better when you write it down. It impacts every cell in your body when you write things down. That's why someone says, I need to remember that. Let me write it down. We normally say that, but then we don't always do that. But this has been an amazing conversation. I can keep talking to you all day about this stuff. This is my lane, right? This is what I love to talk about. And so let me just ask you, if someone wants to apply one idea from Neuro Giving this week to work smarter, what could that be? Just one idea.
I think the one idea that I would take away is actually to be thoughtful of how our brains work. The key is to understand that we're less in control of how our brains work than we think we are, and that our brains do take these shortcuts. They do use heuristics to make decisions. And when we're mindful of that, we start to be open to how we're making decisions subconsciously. And that gives us an opportunity to say, am I actually making the best decision for myself? Or is my brain sort of going on autopilot? And in the case of, that smoker example from Owen, we might not be making the most productive decision for ourselves. And reframing some of our own processes by actually saying, I'm not actually as unproductive as I think I am. I may be more productive. I can be more productive tomorrow than I was today, may be the best opportunity for us.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. Well, Cherian, this has been a great conversation. I want to thank you for being a guest on the Productivity Smarts podcast and really appreciate your wisdom and also taking the time to share your insight, knowledge, understanding of the Neuro Giving concepts in your book so that we can all learn from those and apply them. And so if you're looking to grow yourself in this area, please get the book. It is a well-written book and has a lot of science, but it's written in a way that you can really digest and walk away with practical ideas of things you can do in your business and for your nonprofits. So thank you so much for being a part of it.
That's so kind. Thank you so much for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
Excellent.
If you're enjoying the content and finding it valuable, we would appreciate it if you could take a moment and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us and helps us reach a wider audience. If you leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. Not only does it help us improve the podcast, but it also helps us attract more sponsors and grow our community. Thank you again for your support and for listening to the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to Productivity Smarts, where we help you achieve your goals and live your best life. We hope you've gained valuable insights and actionable strategies to boost your productivity and increase your happiness and fulfillment. Remember to apply what you've learned and keep striving towards your goals. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring episodes and expert advice from our host, Gerald J. Leonard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and unleashing your productivity smarts.